Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Nearshore Cafe podcast. I'm your host, Brian Samson. Today's episode is sponsored by Plug Technologies, plugg.tech, a great way to connect talent from all over Latin America with U.S. companies. If you're a founder in Latin America, this is going to be a great episode for you. We're going to be talking to someone who has built a fintech, raised capital, and we're going to talk all about her journey and doing it from Uruguay. Please welcome Ximena Aleman, founder and CEO of Prometeo. Great to have you.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks for having me. Very happy to be here.
Well, I shared a little bit, just a little teaser on the intro about entrepreneur doing it from Montevideo, Uruguay. A lot of great stuff we'll talk about in the present, but I would love for our audience to get to know you. Could you take us from the start, maybe university to today? Like, how did you get to where you are?
Wow. Yeah, definitely. It was a long way. I major in journalism, which it seems a little bit different from what I do right now, being CEO of a fintech company. And so that's always seems a little bit unorthodox, like a little bit different. I actually think that my background was a key asset for Prometeo. At Prometeo, what we build is fintech infrastructure. We're somehow like rebuilding the foundations of the financial system. And so we are always talking about two things that usually go unnoticed: the infrastructure, in the financial sector. And so we, like as human beings, like we interact with money, and so how the money moves from here to there more efficiently, more inefficiently, but we're not usually thinking about how it
Yes.
went from there to there, and so like the flows, how they got done, they are invisible, and then the tech that powers those flows also go unnoticed. And so being able to translate that complexity into clarity, I think that that's something that I was able to do, or I have been able to do because of this background that I have, because of this, my background as a journalist, like being able to um, somehow like understand complex systems and navigate them. I think that the perhaps what seems like a leap for me was a step, which was, hey, like I understand how this works. I'm able to translate it and I'm able to talk about it. Would I be able to reshape this? You know, um, is that a possibility? And I think that when that sort of clicked inside me, it was like, at least I'll have to try. Like I'll try to see if I can reshape somehow like these flows, how this works. And that's when I became an entrepreneur.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense with the journalism, because you're right. We don't think about, I think a lot of companies are built by engineers with engineer backgrounds, and they think like engineers, they talk like engineers, they explain things like engineers, and they
Yes,
think everyone's an engineer, right? So when you come from a journalism background, it's always who, what, why, when, where, the
exactly.
mystics, the story.
Exactly. And I think that it's not only about the pitch, it's not only being able to design a good pitch deck, and a compelling blurb or elevator pitch, but it's actually like somehow I think that it goes unnoticed that we interact with reality because of language, and so language is the interface in which we interact with everything, even ourselves, and so being able to understand that, I think, is capital, and I think that that's the asset, because basically if you're pitching a problem that hasn't been addressed or that somehow is new, you are creating that problem for someone else. Like someone else will notice that problem because you have addressed it through language. And so I think that having that expertise, it's really important, because it helps you to yeah, to make it more clear, to make it more compelling, and especially when you are building something from scratch, and especially early on in the startup, being able to attract people, like make them gravitate towards your idea. That's very, very important, and it's very powerful. And you only get to do that through language, and with
Yeah.
investors, with talent, with everyone. That's the interface. And so, yeah, I think that's something that for me was very important from my background.
Yeah, I think that's great. Well, tell us more just about your journey. How did you get to where you are today?
Okay, so basically, as I mentioned, I studied journalism. I worked for a couple of years in media outlets in Uruguay, and I got hired by this company, like this entrepreneur that wanted to build a digital spin-off. Like he owned publishing house, and he wanted to build like a spin-off that involved digital content, and that was it, like he knew that something will happen and happen with digital content, and that his company will have to shift towards that. And I was in charge of leading that endeavor, and I became like an entrepreneur, and I loved it. Like this thing, this very adrenalinic process of building something from scratch. And for me, it was sort of obvious that I wanted to do that. And so, like after a couple of years, like the business was stable, revenue, customers, revenue, everything. So like I decided, okay, I'll go for an MBA, with focus in tech businesses because this is what I love. Like I'm in love with technology, and I think that this new world is happening, and I want to build something related to this new world. And and I met my co-founders, Rodrigo, during the MBA. I met Rodrigo and Eduardo, who are my co-founders, and we were talking about digital content, micropayments for digital content, and Rodrigo's expertise was cybersecurity in the financial sector. He used to his background was PCI DSS for financial institutions, and so immediately it was like, okay, payments and fintech wasn't even a word in Uruguay back then.
Yeah.
I'm talking about 2014, 2015. And so, okay, this is like, it seems like a very interesting idea. We should explore it. And we started working on that, like initially as an idea, a brainstorming process. It became a digital wallet. We pivoted and then we created a PFM, a personal finance manager, very similar to Mint in the US, to another equivalent in Brazil, which is called Guia Bolso. And we loved it, like this powerful idea about providing financial education for micro entrepreneurs in Latin America. And while doing this, we understood that there was an infrastructure problem, actually,
Mm.
that was impeding us to build what we wanted to build, but at the same time, that it was transversal to other fintech verticals. Like we all had the same problem trying to interoperate with financial institutions because Eduardo's skill set was very specific in the tech world. He was able to create APIs. So we had the skills to solve that issue for our startup, but it became obvious that there was demand for that, and even from financial institutions, other like large banks would ask us, okay, and how is that you are connecting? And how is it that you are accessing this information? Can you use this information for this, for that? Like, and suddenly we were talking about interoperability. It was not about financial education, user experience, micro entrepreneurs. It was about pure tech, like the plums. And so we said, okay, this is very interesting. We can somehow like different from what we thought initially, we can still like fix this system with a new infrastructure. And for us, fixing this system with a new infrastructure was like the kickoff of Prometeo. That was the insight that drove us to build this API that aggregates. Well, right now, more than 1,500 APIs from more than 1,000 financial institutions in 11 countries.
Yeah. I want to talk about building from Uruguay in fintech, which I have a few maybe assumptions or thoughts about Uruguay, and you could tell me if I'm right or wrong and like how this might have helped. So Uruguay is a small, safe, stable country surrounded by big, loud, chaotic countries. People look to Uruguay sometimes as the Switzerland of Latin America. So the banks are just kind of different there. So tell us maybe about how you thought about your thesis and, building for Uruguay and fintech. And then, the rest of Latin America is just different, bigger, and maybe they have different financial issues or problems.
Well, I think that for financial infrastructure applies the same that can apply for language.
Mm.
We are used to think about, okay, Latin America, leaving Brazil aside, the rest of the region talks Spanish. And if you go to Buenos Aires, you will see that the Spanish is very different from the Chilean one. You have the yapo, and in Argentina is bota. No, o sea, it's very different than Mexico. Órale, and each Spanish has its own flavor, you know.
Hmm.
And for financial infrastructure, it's the same, And so each country has its own financial infrastructure. And so we are somehow like the last financial mile addressing the issues of that infrastructure, but then on top of it, creating as a standardization layer, And um, initially, our thesis was pan-regional, During the first two startups, we were very focused in the Uruguayan market because they were B2C companies, both of them. But when it came to building Prometeo, it was obvious that it was B2B. And of course, like Uruguay is very small and the financial market is very concentrated with very few players. But because Uruguay is also so small, those players, they don't have budget for tech like deployments. They don't take even the decisions at the local level. Most of the decisions are taken by the headquarters, being that in Spain or in Brazil or in the US, wherever. And so like at the local level, you have very like little flexibility, and so the revenue opportunity becomes very, very small.
Mm.
And so for us, it became like really obvious that if we wanted to build a huge company, we had to go beyond Uruguay. And so from the beginning of Prometeo, the idea was creating like this huge layer of financial information, this highway of financial information and transactions. Our first customers were from Colombia. We moved right away to Mexico, like I was living there for more than, I think that 9 months, build, like trying to understand how the financial infrastructure work in Mexico, how they would address open banking, they would when, like the revenue opportunity in that market. And then it was like, okay, where else can we find customers for this, And we started integrating new countries, Panama, Peru. And so from the beginning, for us, it was all about building connectivity across the region. Because at Prometeo, we do not define ourselves as payment company or a data company or a payment player, a data player, we are a connectivity layer, and
Yeah.
so what we do is connectivity. We help companies to interoperate with the financial sector. Yeah.
Yeah. Could you talk about just the general Latin America, maybe banking ecosystem? And, I maybe like my assumption is some countries and banks are much more closed off than others, and how you might navigate that.
I think that there are a couple of things that are very interesting about the current, like the state of the art in Latin America in terms of financial technology. The first thing I think is usually like the first years of these fintech revolutions of this fintech revolution in America were very focused into building financial inclusion. Like the problem in Latin America was that people use cash and they were excluded of the financial sector, both credit cards and banks. Okay. And so I would say that since 2011, 2012 to 2020, there was a lot that happened that involved building inclusion. So making for people easy to access a credit card or a debit card, like power them with a wallet or a bank account. And I would say that Latin America did a great job in that direction because, like, on average, we can talk about like we almost double the inclusion in the continent. Okay. And so that was a huge effort. I think that right now, and like the last couple of years, have been about understanding, okay, powering them with a credit card and a bank account, is that financial inclusion? Is that it? What else? It's like, because in many cases they have that bank account, they don't use it. They have that credit card but they are not using. Small and medium businesses, they keep using cash. 80% of the transactionality goes over cash. That's not an infrastructure. How can we create a better penetration of digital payments? And I think that a lot has been happening around that. And so right now you have real-time payment systems in, of course, Brazil, which is big, a huge success, a huge success. The penetration was, well, hyper growth, like I would say that any startup would dream with the metrics of success that Pix has had, and an amazing accomplishment from the central bank in Brazil. You have Spay in Mexico, you have Breve. It's a Pix-like system that's been deployed in Colombia. Peru, for instance, is doing something a little bit different but equivalent, which is implementing UPI, which is the Indian real-time payment system,
Yeah.
the one from India. So they are taking it to Peru and implementing that, which is amazing. It's like that would be something very different to what the rest of the region has done. You have open banking in Brazil, but then you have real-time payments also in Argentina. You have open banking in Brazil, a huge success as well. Like the penetration of open banking in Brazil is better than the one in India or the one of UK. So great infrastructure, fintech infrastructure in Brazil. And also there's an open banking regulation in Brazil, in Chile, which is being implemented as we speak. Okay. And Colombia has a draft that will get to a regulation hopefully soon, but I think that it's expected that towards next year we'll have like in place a proper regulation of open banking in Colombia. And so I think that overall the region has done a huge effort in order to mutate this infrastructure, and taking it to the next level, understanding the complexities of the region, and something that for me is especially talking with US based people in Latin America, credit cards do not have the penetration that they
Mhm.
have in the US. So
Yeah.
it's not the same. That's why alternative payment methods are so important in Latin America. And that's why the banking rails are so important in Latin America and have grown at the speed that they've had, And so I think that we need to somehow like revamp this old legacy infrastructure from the banks to create this new layer of digital payments that complements the infrastructure from the credit cards.
Yeah. Two questions, and they're a little bit different. The first is, as you brought up the US, and there's a lot of US listeners on this podcast, is there maybe a company that has a lot of similarities to what you're doing, like maybe Plaid or Stripe or Chime? Could you maybe talk about a US player that might be common to what you're solving?
Yes. So I would say that in terms of the infrastructure that we have built and the connectivity that we offer, Plaid definitely it's the benchmark. It's like, okay. And actually we used to say like we are Plaid for LATAM. But because LATAM works differently so towards the US, it didn't make sense to keep saying that, because at the same time we are similar, but we are not that. We are another thing, like something that has been done thinking about the needs of this region. And so that's why like Cloud for LATAM doesn't apply, you know.
Mhm.
It's a different thing. It's like another Frankenstein,
Mhm.
And so, but I would say that the comparison applies. Then I think that in terms of perhaps like the go to market is more of a more treasury, because different to Plaid, which has always been more consumer facing or more inclined towards small and medium businesses, our sales motion is financial. Okay. And
Mm.
so our customers are large financial institutions operating in multiple countries at the same time. And so we enable them with better infrastructure so they can reach with better products their customer base. Okay. But that's also different from what Plaid does.
Yeah.
And so I would say that we are in there in between our like the most popular use cases for Prometeo are account verification. So we are top of mind player in verification of pay in the region. We are providing verification of payee in LATAM and the US. We launched our verification of payee product in the US earlier this year with name matching capabilities. And so being able to offer that in the US, and that like standardizing this verification connectivity across not only LATAM, but also the US,
Mm.
and that for us is a huge milestone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we also provide an API to automate pay-ins and payouts in all of the countries that I just mentioned. Okay. And so I think that's something else different to what Plaid does or what Mon Treasury does is that, of course, we have a cross border angle to our payment solution, okay, which is
Yes.
basically being able to offer connectivity to our customers in the countries where they do not operate and help them to operate there.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. And then my other question is maybe just more of a comment on the state of inflation in Latin America. And by the way, like the US has its own problems, yeah, yeah, yeah. US certainly has its own problems. And there's, I mean, as I lived in Argentina a long time ago, there's what the state says it is, and there's what it really is,
Yeah.
the alternative realities. But it got me thinking about banking penetration, and people wanting to trust banks and use banks. And, you're not gonna have a lot of control over that, and inflation. But maybe just if you had a comment around banking penetration versus countries with high inflation, low inflation, and how that maybe impacts your
I think that doesn't impact our company as it is, but I think that definitely it was a driver for us,
Mm,
a driver to build what we build. And this is something that it's very dear to me, it's something very important, which is core to my beliefs as an entrepreneur, which is like in LATAM, like we have like these issues, inflation, devaluation, poverty. On top of that, you have like, of course, money is scarce, like it's difficult to earn money. It's difficult to keep the money, because you all the time are spending on things, trying to cope with your budget,
mm,
somehow make miracles turn of events and being able to pay everything that you have to pay, and that's like daily life for an average person in Latin America. But on top of all of those things, you have like this thing about the experience of money, you know?
mm,
It's very hard to open a savings account. And so when you have savings, like it's a nightmare navigating like the bank branch in order to open the bank account. And so if you want to save, then you don't like the bank won't pay you a rate on the money that you've put there, And so like it's not just like earning money, but also saving money is very hard. Investing is very hard, And so it's not just like that overall money is scarce, but also that the experience with money is very hard, you
yeah,
know? And because everything that you will do related to money, it will be awful,
mm,
like painful, it will become a struggle for you. And so I think that's something, and this is something that I always tell the team as entrepreneurs, we won't have a saying on inflation, devaluation, poverty, that's not, that's another set of people that they have to like get that better. As fintech entrepreneurs, we do have a saying on reshaping like this experience
mm,
with money,
yeah,
like making for people easier to have like all these experiences towards money and feel about money in a different way that they do right now, and I think that those macros somehow like create this context in which like at least being able to solve that friction for people. I think that that's very, it's challenging, but at the same time it's very comforting.
yeah, yeah. I like that. On our podcast, we've had several VCs that have invested in Latin America. Some are based in Latin America, some are in the States. And for me, it's very exciting because I think 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot of attention and, new capital flowing in for entrepreneurs. I think it's wildly different today. There's a lot more attention. But I'd like to just focus on your specific scenario of at what point did you decide you needed to raise capital, you wanted to raise capital, and how did you think about that? And obviously you were successful. So if you have any advice for those listening on your own experience.
Yeah. And so when we started as an entrepreneurial team with my co-founders, with Rodrigo and Eduardo, like fundraising wasn't even a thing in Uruguay, very small market. There wasn't a VC ecosystem, like no one knew like where are the investors, like how can I reach an investor? Where are they? Where do they live? It was like, I don't know, it wasn't a thing. It wasn't possible. For us, yeah, of course, we bootstrapped, and for us, it was all about getting customers. Like, how can we get customers? The first two startups, like that was our mindset. But then when we started building Prometeo, Mexico launched like this framework, which was the fintech law addressing open banking. And so we thought, okay, we should go definitely to Mexico because we think that time to market there is more nearer than
Mm,
anywhere else in Latin America. And so we went to Mexico, and in Mexico, the VC ecosystem was much more developed. Okay, there was another maturity in the startup ecosystem, and we started talking with other entrepreneurs, and then it became somehow like obvious that if we wanted to build something in the scale of what we wanted to build, something that would operate in 11 countries, like revamping the financial infrastructure, if that was the scale of the vision, that vision needed to be powered with
mm,
another scale of funding, especially given time to market, given that the opportunity was now, not in 15 years. And so we started fundraising. And something that I'm always very honest about is the fundraising experience is very contextual. It's not the same for any entrepreneur, and
mm.
so my advice, I don't know, doesn't apply to all realities,
Okay.
applies to mine and to other that might find themselves in a similar place of the one that I was, And so, yeah, I think that I've learned a couple of things along the way. I think that it's very important when fundraising to understand clearly the audience,
Mm,
what's the investor mindset, and I think that that's very important because you can understand how is it that they are like the boundaries, like what is that they are thinking, and I think that that's very important. And I think that there's something that I've always done that has played in my favor, which is like basically never gave up on an investor that said no.
yeah, yeah.
Like, I don't know, the investor that led our pre-seed, I talked with him for over a year. The investor that led I talked with him for, I don't know, like more than 2 years,
Yeah.
always coming back, always showing results, always showing like the level of execution that we could have
Mm,
accomplished, and ultimately, I think that that speaks for itself, when you reach a certain amount of credibility, you become like unavoidable. It's like, okay, there's definitely something here. And I think that that opens doors. It doesn't open all the doors, but I think that it opens enough doors.
yeah. No, I think that's wonderful. So, man, as we start to wind the show down, I always want to give our guests a chance to talk about their home countries, home cities for the sake of tourism.
Okay.
So tell us more about Montevideo. For those who've never visited, what do they have to do? When should they visit? What time of year? What should they eat? Tell us about that.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, definitely. I live in Montevideo. I love Montevideo. It's a very small city, very safe, very quiet. 1.5 million people. I think that number can create like it portrays what you can expect here. Not a crazy nightlife. Not a lot of people. It's not very cosmopolitic. It's like, but it's very calm. It's a city that you can come in order to relax, enjoy the seaside, a very beautiful seaside, enjoy the sky, enjoy like walking peacefully in the city. And I think that after 30s, you reach an age in which you value all of those things, And so I would say that it's plus. So this is a plus 30 advice. And then I would say that in terms of food, great meat, great meat, great meat. Ask for asado. And we have a local sandwich that it's called chivito. Ask for chivito. And then in the last couple of years, great wines. Not
Mm,
only Tanat, which is like the wine that it's more popular in like from Uruguay, like the one that usually characterizes us, but great white wines,
mm,
albariños, very nice albariños that are being planted in front of the sea, like near Punta del Este, vineyards. If you like vineyards, you should go definitely to Punta del Este and visit local vineyards nearby. There are a couple of them, Viñadén, Garzón, of course, Altos de la Ballena, which is my favorite one. It's a more an underground one, but I would definitely go there. Cerro del Toro, and I like wine, by the way. It wasn't obvious by now. What else? When it comes to sweet things, there's a local cake made with queen's jam that it's
Hmm.
called pasta frola.
Okay.
You should definitely visit a good bakery and ask for one.
Amazing. I love this advice. I can't wait to go back and try some of these things, especially the white wine. I didn't know that was a special thing in Uruguay. I did not know that.
Yeah, a lot of Albarino recently. Good Chardonnays, but especially Albarino is something that you can find like very good quality wine. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, Ximena, it was my pleasure to have you on our show today. Thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you, Brian. It was a very fun conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Good. Well, you're listening to the Nearshore Cafe podcast, sponsored by Plug Technologies, plugg.tech. Great way to connect your team with all the amazing talent in Latin America. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.